Death. In this world nothing is certain but death and taxes. Death comes for us all, but in death our life is etched into the universe with a beginning and an end. Our legacy is set in stone and either celebrated or resented. Today we'll be looking into the death of a largely obscure Roblox game called Starscape. My first encounter in the game was March of 2020 when the lockdowns hit, yay, so I had a lot of time to play it. I have over 400 hours in the game, so I say I'm pretty qualified to make a video about it, though not the most qualified. Let's go over the basic mechanics of the game because I feel like most of you will not be familiar with the game at all. You start off with a starter ship. This feels like a tongue twister. You start off with a starter ship called a Stratos, which you can use to fly it out of the main space station called the Citadel, where everything goes on, apart from like all the space stuff, you know? There are multiple solar systems. Each solar system is contained in its own little server, and each solar system has multiple planets usually. A solar system could either be safe as a capital or secure system that have PvP disabled, or it can be an unsecure or wild system which has PvP enabled but allows for much better loot. When you die in space, you lose your ship and everything you're carrying in your ship. Once you die, your consciousness will also be transferred back to the Citadel into a new clone body. Resources are gathered from mining asteroids or destroying drone ships. Drone ships can drop upgrades, blueprints, or just materials in general. You can probe the system to find anomalies that will help you make a lot of profit. You can craft ships that are big or small and can specialize in mining, fighting, or hauling or selling. You can buy and sell resources from and to other players, creating the central mechanic of the game, the economy. Okay, that was a lot. It's a pretty big game for Roblox, however I haven't really even touched on most of it. However, I feel like we're in a place now that we can continue on with the video. If you wanted to make a name for yourself in Starscape, you need materials or money. To grind Starscape, you had three options. You could either spice trade, which is hauling, mining is just self-explanatory, or killing drones, also known as drone hunting, also known as other stuff. For all of these methods, you need a decent ship in the category, either a Zubron for hauling or a Honey Badger for mining, and any decent Corvette for drone hunting. You want to go out into wild systems and probe for relevant anomalies. For example, if you're mining, you want to find something like an AN, which gives you all of Narcor. Pretty simple way to remember this. AN stands for all Narcor. I don't know what it actually stands for, probably Asteroid Narcor, but you get a lot of Narcor, which Narcor is, well, at least it was, the most expensive material in the game. You could sell that to players and get a lot. For hauling, you can find a wormhole at Frontier Outpost and another Frontier Outpost on the other side, and you can instantly transfer between two sides of space, making a hell of profit. As for drone hunting, kill drones. You want to go to the wild systems because it likely has the most loot and less people are likely to be there, as there's a lot more wild systems than there are secure systems. With a couple of good expeditions, you can quickly find yourself making money you can use to buy basically anything in the game. However, a strategy this profitable always comes with risks. In the game, you can steal other players' materials by taking them off their dead corpses. This leads to players destroying other players for the resources in wild systems and ultimately the rise of piracy. Obviously, for venture capitalists, that's not really a thing you want. You don't want piracy. Pirates are bad for the economy. Obviously, there are a lot of people who didn't like pirates because they were venture capitalists, who didn't like pirates, they were ruining the economy. So this led to alliances between factions. Player factions were another feature in the game. You could play credits, the in-game currency, to make a faction for yourself and upgrade it. Factions would recruit people, and a lot of the faction stuff was done through Discord, where they'd make alliances and set relations with other factions. There were a lot of big alliances between factions, such as Golden Accord and many others. There were pirate alliances, there were anti-pirate alliances, there were just mining alliances that just did their own thing or whatever. There was small faction alliances, which, you know, they wanted to be big little guys, but they were too little, so they banded together. They're trying to make a big little guy, a big guy for the little guys, little factions. This quickly became complicated as political charts were developed, where kill on sight and warrior and you know, just complicated relations Ultimately, the amount of community in this game is shown right here. The fact that there's such specific relations between player-generated factions is kind of insane. There were legitimately spies that would infiltrate other factions in a LEGO space game, as the community says. Combat-focused factions would hold trainings and, general get-togethers to take photos and whatnot, and prepare for war. Wars happened. Look at this footage. Wars are ultimately a testament to how much the community brought life into this game. Wars never won you anything, but they were so fun. To see a group of people working together for something that ultimately is kind of silly is great. Let's just watch a few more of these clips, they're really fun. Look at that. And like, even just besides the war, there's clips of killing the giant drone battleships. Yeah, it's cool, isn't it? Okay, let's talk about factions. I can't really go over a whole history of all the factions like SJC and I can't remember the other ones, to be honest, but I don't really want to research this either because I'm not really bothered enough. I'm just gonna give you an idea what a general faction was like. Factions needed two things, money and people. A lot of factions would lure new players in by giving them a little Corvette to help them out. This also allowed new players to be more profitable to the factions. Factions could offer things such as insurance and sometimes loans. This ultimately just speaks to how crazy the community was. A whole economy was created. Banks were made, such as in the finance group Black Sheep Finance, a group that made the Black Sheep Index, which just detailed everything going on in the market right then. There was also news stations and bot developers for Discord. A lot of this game ultimately happened in Discord more than the actual game. There were factions that used the stock market to profit. There were hedge funds. I mean, really, it's hard to express, but it was like a little metaverse where people would do the economy, but a fake economy. A better version of the metaverse, one that doesn't suck. The game's community, as I've kind of mentioned before, was half the game. Zola Kef, or Keith, I think it's Keith. I'm gonna assume it's Keith. Keith, if you're not Keith, you're now Keith, okay? Keith had a few dreams in his time for the game. He wanted to give to the community by expanding the amount of influence the players could have on the actual game. Player-owned stations were a big goal that Keith was working really hard on. The idea of player-owned stations had been dreamt before. There'd also been the idea of landing on planets, however the servers were not able to handle that. But with player-owned stations, with the creator fund being created, it seemed possible for Keith to be able to make it. And so he tried. Keith made a product that was very promising. He even showed footage of stations filled with NPCs that you could manage and transform to whatever you like. However, eventually, Keith ended up burning out. Ultimately, this was a one-man project. Sure, he had help with the creator fund, however, it was impossible. Roblox's engine is just not that powerful. With Keith's burning out and moving on to other things, the game was left in stasis for a while. The Discord servers were locked down and the game wasn't receiving any updates, so bugs would come through, people would duplicate items. It became a mess. For multiple years until the start of this year, the server was abandoned. The game was abandoned. There were no updates. However, one day, a message was sent. Keith was back. However, this time it was different. You see, in this game, one thing had been driving the community more than ever. One thing had given them new life. The potential to influence the game. The potential of player stations. Starscape is a vast universe that you have no influence over. Everything just remains the same. You're just there, mining the same systems over and over again in your tiny little honey badger. But people longed for more. They wanted a payoff. They wanted more than just fighting each other, more than just meaningless wars. They wanted the community to be in the game. They wanted to see the player-owned factions. They wanted to see stations. They wanted to leave their mark. But in a vast universe like this, you cannot do such a thing. When Keith came back, he made it clear that he wasn't going to be working on anything of the sorts anytime soon. There were a few small additions to the game and it's still being updated to this day. However, However, the game has returned to what it once was. It's funny, we say a game has died, but it's never when it's actually gone. Right now, you can still go and play the game, but there will be one day where you cannot, as death comes for us all. I think we found our killer. Who killed Starscape? Roblox's engine. Keith was arguably one of the greatest developers in Roblox, so if he couldn't create what the community wanted, who else could? Death comes for us all, but this game continues to live on. Sure, it won't be what it used to be, but it will continue nonetheless. Maybe a new generation will find it, or maybe it'll just continue being a one-man project that Keith makes for himself. Starscape didn't die, but unfortunately, the community it once had kind of did. So, rest in peace, Starscape. You will live on in our memories.